Hello and welcome to So You Got a Life Sci Degree, Episode 1. We're your hosts, Farida and Lisa, two life sci undergrad students trying to navigate our future careers. Today we're talking to Kara Griffiths about market access in the pharmaceutical industry.
Kara is a Senior Manager of Market Access, aka Reimbursement, at Gilead Sciences, Mississauga. She works to get pharmaceuticals covered under insurance policies. She completed her undergrad degree in Nutritional and Nutraceutical Sciences at the University of Guelph. After that, she entered the Master of Biotechnology program at the University of Toronto, where she learned about the intersection of science and business. Thank you for joining us today, Kara.
Thanks for having me. This is my first experience on a podcast, so really excited to chat with you both. And what a neat idea for you guys to take this on for life science students.
Yeah, we're gonna ask you some really tough questions.
I hope
starting
not.
with,
I'll do my best.
So our first difficult question is just maybe tell us what your job is, because a lot of people, when we say market access, they don't really know what that means. So yeah, just what do you do? What's your role?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a tough one to explain. And I think when I came into the pharmaceutical industry, I didn't know much about this space or what this job entailed, and it's something that I kind of just learned as I went. But in a nutshell, really, in my role, so as you mentioned, it can be called either market access or reimbursement. The terms are relatively interchangeable. And essentially, I work with health technology agencies, the provincial drug plans, private payer bodies, to essentially achieve public reimbursement or private reimbursement for our drug products across Canada. So that entails a lot of different pieces, but really the ultimate intent is for our drug products to have reimbursement, so that when you or someone in your family would go to the pharmacy to fill a prescription, if that drug product is quote unquote free of charge, that essentially means that the drug product has been reimbursed and is paid for by the provincial drug programs or by your respective drug plan. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what reimbursement entails.
Right. So it's basically that you're working with either private or public, government insurances, to make sure that the products that your company creates, like the drugs, they get covered so that people can use them, and essentially it can be profitable. So you mentioned that you work with both public and the private sides?
Yeah, so I actually have a colleague that covers the private side of things. So that would be like your Sun Life or your Manulife or Great West Life, for example. Those are some of the bigger insurance providers. I work on the public side, so I would work with the provincial drug program. So for example, in Ontario, it would be the Ontario Drug Program. And I would negotiate our drug prices with the drug program in order to achieve access for all of our patients for their respective therapy areas that we cover at Gilead. And that would be the same across the industry at different companies as well.
Thanks. That's a succinct summary.
Did you want to just go over what does your day-to-day look like? What kind of work do you do on a daily, weekly basis?
For sure. So in my current role, I'm responsible for both our HIV portfolio as well as our inflammation portfolio. And so the role is relatively similar across the two different therapy areas, but it of course differs depending on where the drug product is in its life cycle. So last year, I worked predominantly on an HIV file that now has achieved public reimbursement. And so I've switched gears a little bit to the rheumatoid arthritis space, which is we're just preparing for launch right now. And so what that would look like on a day-to-day basis is there's a lot of interaction with my cross-functional team. So that would be people from the commercial team or the marketing team, the regulatory team, the medical team. So there's a lot of different people involved with bringing these drug products to market and ensuring alignment across the organization. So we would be sharing insights across those functions. I also, day-to-day, would be working on our pricing strategies. So our list price, which is the public price that you would see on a provincial formulary, or the net price, which is the confidential price that we as the manufacturer would negotiate with each of the different drug plans. So I would be doing analyses on that to figure out, what makes sense for that given therapy area or that given product, given the guidelines that we have to adhere to. I would also work on brand planning with the team. So we're currently actually in the brand planning cycle right now for 2021. So what we would do in that, and what I would do day to day, is really figure out what are the different strategies that will ultimately result in success in 2021. And once we've outlined our strategies and our overall brand plan, what are the different tactics that I'm responsible for in order to deliver on that strategy and in order to achieve success in 2021 and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of other different ad hoc pieces that would occur day to day. For example, right now I'm preparing a submission for our health technology agency. And so as part of that, I would be working on different components of our submission, such as the clinical summary for our product. So looking at the value proposition that this product provides for patients as well as for payers. We would be putting together our models, so our health economic model, a budget impact model, and there's a lot more that goes behind that as well. So it's a very diverse job. There's a lot of different pieces involved, and that's really why I enjoy this space. And it's a function that I've stayed within the pharmaceutical industry for the last few years now, because it's really, every day is different. There's always something different depending on the product you're working on, the therapy area you're working within, the people that you're working with, the different patient groups we work with. So very diverse. Every day is new. Every day is exciting. And that's really why I enjoy working in the reimbursement space.
Yeah, I was like making a list of things as you were like talking about like the different things you do, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a lot. So yeah, like pricing, it's like a lot of like work in teams, like making models.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest things you say, working in teams. I think that's a huge part that I love about this role. And I think a lot of different roles within the pharma industry work within teams, but particularly in my role, because I touch so many different functions and require input from so many different functions, that it's really a collaborative environment. And I work with some really great people across the different teams.
Hmm. Um, and so for kind of background for everyone listening, Kara is actually my mentor as part of the scholarship program that I am in slash was in for the 2019 to 2020 like kind of like season year. And so as part of that, I was able to go to Gilead and kind of learn a bit about like kind of like the drug pipeline, but more of what happens after all the hard science, like more of like the administrative stuff and like marketing and working with insurance. So we thought it might be cool if you could like maybe walk the listeners through that, like just talk about, like just like if you, I know it's a lot to do, but if you can just like really quickly outline to your knowledge, like from like step 0 to like step 100, how a drug gets like approved to be used.
Yeah, and you're right. It's a long process. It takes many, many years. So I'll tell you the abbreviated version. That's kind of within my scope. So of course, as you know, there's a lot of research and development that goes into every drug product that comes to market. And for every drug that comes to market, there's hundreds that don't come to market. Um, but once you get through the research and development, the clinical trials begin. There's several years worth of clinical trials that would take place prior to a drug being filed to the regulatory agencies. And once the drug is filed to the regulatory agencies, so for example, for us, that would be Health Canada, the product then goes through a review with Health Canada, which takes about 12 months. If it's a standard review, it would take about a year. And while that's taking place, in my role in reimbursement, in parallel, I would be putting together a submission dossier for HTA, or the Health Technology Assessment Agency, that would review the drug product from a reimbursement perspective. So those two streams are happening in parallel. Around the 12-month mark, where the drug product would ultimately, let's assume that it achieves a Health Canada approval. From that point, now the drug can be marketed in Canada. So now it can be made available to patients, and it can be marketed and sold by the manufacturer. And then following that approval is when I would receive the recommendation from the Health Technology Agency to say, essentially, yes, this product should be reimbursed given its clinical and economic profile, or no, it should not be reimbursed. And so assuming that that would be a positive outcome, we would then proceed through to negotiations with what's called the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, or the PCPA for short, We would negotiate the confidential net price for a drug product. If successful, we would then reach an agreement collectively with the provinces and territories. And then at that point, once the contracting process is finished, the drug product would be made available on formulary, and patients would have the drug product paid for by their respective drug plan, whether that's private or public. So that, even in and of itself, post approval can be quite a lengthy process, and there's years and years of work that go into it before it's even filed with the regulators. So it's a very lengthy process to bring drugs to market, and there's a lot of people involved to make that happen.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you mentioned that there are like hundreds of drugs that don't get made. We're gonna circle back to that at the end because I have a question about that for later.
Yeah. And as I was listening to earlier when you were mentioning like all the different types of tasks that you do in your day to day, I was kind of thinking like, I don't know if I'm qualified to do any of those things, even though I'm like nearing my undergrad degree. So I was just wondering like what, when you were like first thinking back to when you first got the job, like how much do you feel like you had to learn on the job, or like how prepared did you feel before going in?
That's a fantastic question. And hopefully my current and prior managers are not listening to this, but I relatively knew nothing when I started my roles. And it's really, it's the kind of job I feel like that you learn once you're there. And, I tell a lot of people that when I was starting out and I was going through school, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do, where I wanted to end up. And I stumbled upon the pharmaceutical industry through my master's program.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I was in my master's program, I didn't quite know what different roles within the pharma industry would entail. And it's really something that I learned through my internship, and then following my internship, and once I changed into the reimbursement space. But it's not something that I learned in school necessarily. It's really something that you figure out and you learn as you go with your peers in your day-to-day job. And I think it just takes a lot of curiosity and a lot of willingness to learn, and to just kind of dive right in and ask a lot of questions, and listen, and really just kind of tackle it as you get there. And that's kind of the approach that I took, and it's worked quite well to this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it really comes down to a lot of the skills that you learn in school, not so much the content that you're learning in school, but the skills that you're learning in school. As I mentioned before, teamwork is such an important part. And that's something that you learn throughout school, working on team projects, collaborating with different people from different departments, from, different levels of experience. And that's such a transferable skill into this industry.
Mm-hmm.
So it really does come down to the skills and not so much the knowledge that you have. So absolutely, you would have no problem jumping right in, I'm sure, and figuring it out as you go.
Yeah, that's like that's reassuring to hear because yeah, I think Frida, I think I've like briefly talked to you about this, but like I often get the sensation that because, like we've been in school for basically our entire lives, and in school you don't do like real projects. Like you're not really filing a report that's going to be sent to the government or anything like that. So like I kind of feel like I've never really done any like quote unquote real work. But yeah, so like it's reassuring to hear that you learn a lot on the job. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. I learned all of it on the job, so it's definitely doable.
That's cool. That's cool. And like since you mentioned your master's program, that's kind of like a good segue into like because we wanted to ask you about your education since part of this podcast is like what can you do with a life sci degree, and that's like you kind of had a degree in that field. So we were wondering if you could just talk a bit about like why you went into the undergrad you did, like what you were thinking at the time, and just maybe tell us a bit about your journey of how you went from like early undergrad to like going into your master's and then ending up where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. I took a pretty straightforward path, I guess, now looking back. But at the time, to be honest, when I went into my undergraduate degree and even my master's degree, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. And I think that's similar for a lot of people that are in undergrad degrees. So,
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's something I learned after the fact, that you're not alone, and a lot of people are still really trying to figure it out as they go, which is so common. But as I went into my undergrad degree, as you mentioned, I did a Bachelor of Science. I think right out the gates, my initial idea was that I would be a doctor, like many others that go into a science degree out of high school. I pursued that a little bit. I did write the standardized tests. I did, get a little bit close
I didn't know
to a
that.
unfortunately, it
Wow.
was a bit of a grind. So I did think about medicine. I learned pretty early on, though. I think it was probably at the beginning of my second year of undergrad that I decided that probably wasn't the best path for me. Something kind of clicked and it just didn't seem like the right path. I didn't necessarily know what was the right path, but I was going to try and figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I approached my third year, I was really fortunate to make some really strong connections with some of my professors in some courses that were a lot more hands-on, applied, smaller class sizes. I really got to know my peers and my instructors. And they opened some doors for me and really helped me see what else was out there beyond, your typical medical school or dental school. And so I had some really fantastic experience in a few different labs, working with a few different professors. And that showed me that although I really enjoyed working in a research lab and working with the people that I worked with, that wasn't something that I wanted to do long term.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, that was something I learned along the way that it wasn't quite the right path for me. And so when I was in I think my third year, maybe going into my fourth year, I stumbled upon the Master of Biotechnology program, which again, I didn't know much about at the time, but I did a bit of research and learned that the Master of Biotechnology program is intended for science students. You have to have a Bachelor of Science degree in order to enter the program, which was reassuring for me because it would be a lot of people that I thought would be very like-minded and would be very science-oriented. But it combined business with science. So it was kind of like an MBA degree, but for science students, which really appealed to me at the time.
Right.
And so I applied for that program and was really fortunate to be accepted. And so I pursued the Master of Biotechnology program after my undergraduate degree. And as part of the MBiotech program, it's a two-year long program. It's course-based. So the first about 8 or 9 months, you're in the lab, you're doing courses, you're learning introductory to business courses, accounting. And then at the end of that year, you apply to different internships within the pharmaceutical industry. And so that was kind of my entryway into the pharmaceutical industry. Again, didn't quite know what I wanted to do within the industry, but I knew that regardless of the path I took, it would be a good learning experience, and you can always move around once you're there. You just kind of have to get your foot in and start to gain the experience. And so I completed an internship in the clinical development department at a pharmaceutical company where I was essentially managing the day-to-day operations of clinical trials. And so I did that for a bit of time for my internship. And then following that is when I transitioned into reimbursement, which is what I still do today.
Uh-huh. And that wasn't at Gilead. That was like at like a previous company you were at, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that was at a bigger pharma company for my internship.
Mm-hmm. And I see the connection with like the research too, because of the clinical trials.
Exactly. And it was a very operational type role, which at the time I thought would really fit with my skills and my interests. I'm a very kind of OCD type person. I'm very organized. I'm very like that's just kind of the way that I think, and so that really worked well for me for my internship, and I thought it was a really really good fit. But then I decided that once I finished that internship, I decided that I wanted to look more to the commercial side of the business and see what happens after a drug product gets approved and how does the drug product actually make its way to patients and what happens once it's on the market. And so that's kind of how I ended up making the transition over to the commercial side of the business. And I haven't turned back since then.
Yeah. No, it's I think it's funny because I think of it like as a person walking along a line, and you seem to have transitioned more from like slowly from like the hard science to then like the clinical trials to then like the post like more like legislative-ish like kind of work. So that's kind of cool. Like yeah, thanks for summarizing that for us.
Yeah, and it's funny because and I've told a few people that when I was starting out in my internships, I didn't quite know what all the different roles within the pharma industry entailed or what they looked like, but for whatever reason, I decided I had no interest in applying to any of the roles within reimbursement or pricing for no real reason. It was just kind of a gut feeling at the time that that's not quite what my interest was. And so it's so funny looking back that that's exactly where I am today. And so I think it really just goes to show that, if you take the opportunities that are in front of you and you really take the time to be curious and to network and to meet people and learn about their experiences, you never really know where it's going to take you. And that's kind of the path that I followed to where I am today. So, yeah.
Yeah, and kind of related to the note about not really knowing what kind of roles there are in the pharma industry, I feel like we're kind of in that situation, and a lot of people, like our peers in our classes, are very much like it's kind of murky, like what are the various available roles in kind of biotech or in pharma. So would you mind like elucidating if there's any other like besides market access, if there's other like kind of similar roles that you were thinking would be suited for you at that time?
Yeah, so when I was looking to apply to different internships, I was mostly interested in the clinical trial management, which is what I ended up doing. I was also looking at regulatory affairs, so that would be part of the team that would be putting together the files to submit the drug product to Health Canada for marketing authorization or for approval. Um, but then there's a lot of other roles predominantly on the commercial side of the business. So whether that's working within the marketing team, sales team, the market access or reimbursement team, which is where I am now. Um,
So are these primarily people who have more like science backgrounds, or is it like mostly people coming in with business backgrounds? Or
yeah, it's a real mix, I find. There's some people that I've seen that work in very marketing oriented roles, and they largely have business or economics backgrounds. But some of them also have science backgrounds. And conversely, I've also seen people that have a science background and go into a more business oriented role. So it's not it really doesn't make too much of a difference, I would say, depending on the undergrad degree that you have. It's more about the experience, and I think it's just really about learning the job once you're there. And even if you're not a science student, but you come into a pharmaceutical role, that's you kind of have to know the science of the drugs that you're working with.
right.
It's something that you can learn when you're there. So yeah, you don't necessarily have to be too technical, but there definitely are some people that are. There's some people that have PhDs as well within the medical department. So it's a pretty mixed bag, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Let us know if you're not comfortable with answering this, but I was just curious, like, have you ever had to hire someone? Because I know it says on your LinkedIn at least that you're like a senior manager. So I was wondering if you've ever had to like hire someone to be a part of your team, and like, or like even if you haven't had to do that, like kind of what are the things that an employer would look for if they were hiring like in general in the pharma industry or like for something similar to your role?
Yeah, I think again it all comes back to really the skills that you learn in school. So someone that's a team player and can collaborate well with others is such a strong asset for anyone coming into this space. Someone that's really curious and willing to learn and can really manage themselves without too much direction, but at the same time, you can ask questions if needed. So someone that's a self-starter, I would say. Um, what else? Those are kind of the big ones. I mean, it really comes down to fit for us, the people that I've, been part of interviews for people that are joining our team. It's really a lot about fit. Not so much about the degree you have. I think there's a certain baseline that's expected. So a science degree would absolutely
Mm-hmm.
be required. But beyond that, it's more about the experiences you've had, maybe different jobs you've had before you're entering this space, even if it's seemingly small jobs that you might have had throughout your undergrad degree. It's really about what you learned from those experiences. Your organizational skills, your communication skills. Are you someone that's able to comfortably present in front of a large group of people or to senior management? And so it's really more about those skills that you may have picked up in school or just from jobs along the way throughout your school years.
Hmm. All right, and I was just wondering, in your role right now, like, what are some things that what are your favorite things about the job or position, and then what do you find most challenging or difficult for you?
I think the part that I like the most about my job, again, I've said this so many times, so I feel like I'm being repetitive, but it's the people that I work with.
I mean, that's a really good answer. If you like who you're working with, that's just great.
Exactly, and I think people are so important, and that's something that I've underestimated, but that I've really come to realize in recent times is the people that you work with really make the job so much more enjoyable, and we're spending so much time with each other every day, even remotely through this COVID period right now, where we're on Zoom all day, every day together, and so it really makes such a significant difference for the job. So the people that I work with is number one on the list for sure. And then, as cliche as it sounds, I really do love what I do. And I feel like the role that I have makes such a significant impact on people's lives. Particularly in my role when I'm working to gain or to achieve reimbursement for our HIV drug
Mm-hmm.
products. It's such a life changer for people to be able to have access to these medications that might have challenges that prevent them from being able to get access to these medications. And some of the stories that we hear, it's very impactful and it really resonates with me, and it kind of keeps me going. And again, as cliche as it sounds, it really it's very fulfilling, and that it makes
Yeah.
it all really worthwhile.
Yeah, like are you able to like share any like like obviously without names or anything, but are you able to share any stories just to like be more like how does like do you know anything about the statistics of like how drug usage for like a particular medication changes if it's not covered under like a public or private health plan?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it really, again, it depends on the therapy areas. So, for example, if we look at HIV, the public private split for the HIV market is roughly 80-20. So, about 80% of the market for HIV drug products, patients would be covered by a public plan, and about 20% would be covered by a private drug plan. And so, if you look at that space, having public access, which is what my role is really fundamental to having success with that drug product, and to have physicians prescribe that drug product for their patients because they know that it has coverage and they know that people can access it.
Hmm.
Versus if I was unsuccessful at achieving reimbursement, which has happened in the past, that would be a drug product that would not necessarily be prescribed as much, just given the fact that patients wouldn't have coverage for that drug. And so you might look to another drug in that space that does have coverage. So yeah, having public or private coverage for your drug product is really critical in order to ensure that patients can access the drug and that physicians can prescribe that drug for their patients, knowing that it will be paid for. And that would be the case across all therapeutic areas wherever there's a number of options within that given space. You could look at any therapy area. Asthma, for example, you would be more inclined to take a drug that would be paid for, that has coverage, whether that's public or private. Yeah, so it makes a really, really significant difference.
Yeah, I think I can actually personally relate to that as well because like I've seen doctors for I don't know if I've mentioned but like chronic pain stuff, and I remember my rheumatologist, one of the things he asked me, he was like, okay, well, I want you to try like this drug but it's not covered under the plan, and he asked me like, can you afford it? And I was like, well, let's try it. But yeah, no, it's interesting to know that like that's like, and like I think that's something that I've started to think about more in the past year and two. And like I actually like was listening to an interesting lecture about it as well, like a couple weeks ago, but kind of just about how health policy and like public perception totally impacts like how we use like our scientific knowledge. Like it's not all just like we're gonna make like the best decision based on like like the science we have. Like there's also a lot of factors like cost and like how people like view drugs and
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you raise a good point. Cost is absolutely a consideration, and it's something that physicians think about. It's something that patients think about. And as you mentioned, it's something that you've thought about in the past. And So if there's anything that we can do in our roles to really minimize the barriers for patients or physicians to be able to access drug products, that's ultimately the goal.
Lisa, you were looking for like anecdotes before, and this is kind of, I guess, related, but my dad's actually part of a drug trial right now, and for his arthritis.
What?
Yeah, so he's like later.
Whoa.
Yeah, he's on the very late stages. So right now he's getting it for free. But
It's not Gilead, is it?
I honestly don't know, but yeah,
Wow.
it's like crazy how good it's like working for him and stuff like that. But the thing is, like, he definitely can't afford it if it's not like covered under insurance. So it's like, there you
Oh.
go.
How does that work? Like, does he stay on the drug after the trial period is over?
Right now, they haven't said anything like that. So yeah, we don't know yet.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very neat. Well, that's great to hear that it's working so well for him.
Yeah, it
What a
really
fantastic
is.
story.
That's cool. And I guess like kind of along the same line of asking slightly tough questions. So the pharmaceutical industry in general has definitely been in the news lately in the past couple years, or maybe just in general. And I know that like some people our age have biases because we read in the news like, like pharmaceutical agency X has just raised the price of this like life-saving drug by like, like 10,000%, that kind of thing. So, and you mentioned like how part of the reason you enjoy your work is because you like see the positive impact it has. So we were kind of just wondering if you could speak to a bit about like, um, just like how you like the role, like how you feel that like pharmaceutical industries like help society, or like just kind of like their morality, especially. And like you mentioned that like for every drug that's made there are hundreds that don't get made. So if you could just explain like a bit about like the pricing of drugs and like, yeah, just kind of like the more, do you like, I don't know if that makes any sense. Let me know if you need me to clarify.
Yeah, no, there's a lot in that question. And I guess,
Yes.
in simple terms, it's a complicated process, but in simple terms, a lot of the media that we see really comes out of the States, which has very different policies relative to what we have.
I see.
And so it's a bit of a different case. But in Canada, we do have a pricing rate regulator called the PMPRB, which you probably read about in the news recently. That does have control over our list pricing, and so there are absolute rules in place that kind of govern the way that we are able to price our medicines relative both to the class of medicine. So if there's existing products in that class, you would be priced relative to those, as well as your price relative to a basket of international comparator countries for that same product. So there are pricing controls in place to ensure that medicines are priced appropriately. And then that's from a list price perspective. From a net price perspective, we do negotiate in order to achieve access on formulary. So even beyond what the public consumer would see, there are further discounts that are taken in order to ensure that the drug is considered to be affordable for drug plans to pay for and for patients to have access to. So there's a lot that goes on in order to achieve that. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, so basically in Canada, like unlike the States, it's more difficult, or at least like there are rules so that companies can't like suddenly increase the medication by like a lot in terms of
Exactly.
price.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
And like kind of like I guess like the second half of the question, you mentioned earlier again how for every drug that is made, like there are hundreds that don't get made. So like could you just like elaborate a bit upon that, and like maybe just talk about how like the risks that pharmaceutical like the financial risks that pharmaceutical companies take to come out with like working products?
Yeah, and I think that that's something that isn't spoken about maybe enough in the public, is that for every drug that comes to market that either cures a disease or significantly treats a disease or helps patients, regardless of what the product is, there's a number of products for that same therapeutic area that have gone through clinical trials. They've gone through research and development for many, many years before that drugs eventually come to market, that don't achieve success. So, the drug product may be in phase 1 clinical trials and you don't quite see the benefit that you saw prior to that. And so that program would be suspended. But even if it was suspended in phase 1 trials, there's already been significant investment, both from a dollar perspective as well as from a human resource perspective, that would have gone into that. And we've seen drug products that have made it all the way to phase 3 trials, which is the time when we would be filing for marketing authorization, that don't make it through phase 3 trials because they don't necessarily meet the endpoints of that clinical study. And so, there's a lot that goes into getting a product to market before the public sees that product come to market. And it's a significant investment by the pharmaceutical industry in order to get to that point. And there's hundreds and hundreds of molecules that don't make it for everyone that does. So it's a lot of time and investment. And so when we do get products that come to market, it's quite an achievement, and there's a lot of work that has gone into it by that point.
Yeah. It's like not even just money, it's like time because it's,
Exactly.
years and years. I actually think it's interesting how it's kind of like movies because if you think so um like big companies like listen, I don't know movie companies, but I'm gonna Marvel? Is that a movie? I don't know. They make things. Um, so like they can afford to take risks, like they can afford to make a movie that loses 5 million because if they make a few, there's probably going to be one that like makes 20 million. And it's kind of like that, I feel like, with pharmaceutical industries where like because they're so big, they can afford to take these risks. Whereas like if they were like a very small like company, they wouldn't be able to like invest like 10 years. So that's kind of an advantage of like, you know, like I guess being a larger company.
Yeah, no, that is a good analogy to make, and that we could talk for days about this, but I think that really comes back to the pricing discussion we were having, which is there needs to be a fair price for a drug product in order not only to recuperate the costs for bringing that product to market and making it through phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials and all of the research and development, but also to recover the cost for the drugs that didn't necessarily make it to market, and in order to be able to reinvest in research and development in order to achieve the next product a few years from now that will come through the pipeline and that will eventually make it. So it's a constant cycle of once a drug product makes it, we're already working on the next one. So yeah, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. We could talk for days.
Yeah, it's really interesting too with like all the vaccine talk right now, how a lot of the issues are just like supply chain based and not even just like the actual science itself. Yeah,
Like for COVID?
yeah, yeah. Yeah. Kind of moving away from, the nitty-gritty of the pharmaceutical industry, going back to your a bit about your career and profession. If you were to kind of go through this process again, is there anything that you would change about how you pursued this career or this role that you currently have?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't think so. As I said earlier, I think for me, the path that I took, if you were to ask me 5 years ago where I thought I would be, this is absolutely not what I would have said. Um, but it's really just it's been a result of some networking, different opportunities that I've pursued that have kind of presented themselves as I went along my career journey. And again, if I was to chart this out, I would have never guessed that I would be here in reimbursement today. But I think it's just a result of meeting the right people and really putting in a lot of work to explore different opportunities at different times, and being curious to learn more about different areas within the space, within the industry. So no, I wouldn't change anything. I think I would hope that I would end up right back where I am today, because I do find this job so interesting, and it's exciting. It's every day is different, and you never quite know what's around the corner. So yeah, I wouldn't change anything. I really wouldn't.
Yeah, I think hearing you talk about how much you really like the job that and the role that you're in right now, it's really reassuring to me because I think everyone around like our age right now is kind of like questioning what their original career decisions and things like that. So yeah, it's really nice to just hear that you ended up in a place that you really enjoy now. So that's really reassuring. Kind of along those lines, what kind of advice would you give to any budding life science student right now who's either interested in your profession or just kind of try to make a good career?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is to not worry if you don't have, your next 1 or 2 or 3 years figured out and you don't quite know where you want to be yet. I can absolutely relate. I was in that same position throughout my undergraduate degree, and you'll find out after the fact that a lot of other people are in that same position. You kind of feel like it's just you, but it's really not. Um, and so, just I think you have to be patient. I think a really big piece of advice I would give to people, and I would give to myself if I was to go back in time as well, is to just keep your options open. You don't necessarily have to have it all figured out, even when you're graduating from undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
If you can keep your options open, continue your education to ensure that you have that baseline education that will allow you to really pursue whatever career path you ultimately end up pursuing. Network with people to find out what other opportunities there are, whether it's in a space that you know that you absolutely want to work in, or maybe you'll learn something that you didn't quite know about,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll end up following a completely different career path. It's all about keeping your options open. It's all about networking with people to find out what those options even are. I think that would be my biggest piece of advice. And then, opportunities will present if you meet the right people and you speak with enough people in different walks of life and different, someone in a research lab or someone that's a bit more experienced in the industry. You kind of just learn as you go, and the opportunities will present. So keep your options open, be curious, and network with lots of people, and I think you'll find great success.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we are about to wrap up. Last question. Is there anything else you want to add before we stop recording?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of ground in the last hour.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much for speaking with us. And for you like held our hands too. Like you like clarified yourself. You like helped us clarify our questions. It was very helpful. And yeah, just for talking about slightly more risque topics too, and just yeah, taking that on. So thank you very much. So we wanted to take this moment to tell you about our Patreon. We're raising funds in order to help pay for our podcast hosting service, equipment upgrades, and our own website. If you head over to patreon.com/so you got a lifesci degree, you can view our 3 membership levels and the cool perks that come with them. For $1 a month, you can access bonus minicasts, which are 5 to 10-minute episodes where we talk about the interesting shenanigans in our lives, including weird animal discoveries like the truth behind blobfish. To check out this and our other perks, click on over to patreon.com/so you got a lifesci degree. I was like so whatchamacallit, caught up with like making notes on what she like small notes on what she was saying and like questions I wanted to ask that I didn't make any notes for like this discussion.
Oh, that's why. Then you're just gonna hear a lot of me talking.
Ooh, okay, you want to start? Instantly put on the spot. Instantly nothing.
Yeah. No, it's okay. So one of the people who we have on our like interviewing list for like potential guests later is that prof that I really like, Gary Bruhard. Um, and so he basically has this like halfway through the class he talks about this like essentially a cure for a certain type of cancer that like came out of his research basically. He was kind of like, yeah, it would save a whole lot of lives, but like right now, he can't get enough people to kind of fund it to get it into clinical trials and stuff like that. So I was telling the story to my dad, who, by the way, like does he worked as like a costing person, more on the accounting side of like a pharma company for a long time.
What has your dad not done?
Yeah,
Like
honestly, yeah. um, so yeah, I was telling him about this, and he was like, "Yeah, like it's so." He's kind of emphasizing the point of like, yeah, it's not really about the drug. Like, there's so many steps in which it can go wrong. Like, delivering and like manufacturing, and like even just like if they have the right containers to like be able to transport that drug, like to not ruin it and stuff like that. Like, I don't know.
uh-huh.
It's just like yeah,
Yeah.
related to that discussion of like, there's so many things that can go wrong. Like, yeah,
Yeah. Like, okay, it's like so hard not to get into the vaccine talk, but just a little bit of the vaccine talk. Like that lecture that I listened to, one of the things that the professor mentioned, she was like, it like the container, it impacts like so the vaccine can like stick to the container, right?
mm,
So like they have to like consider that too because that affects the dosage. Like you know how there's like a bunch of stuff in vaccines, but like they don't want like the actual, you know, like viral particle or like protein to like stick to the sides. So there's like other chemicals that they add so that those chemicals will stick to the
Oh my
sides
god,
and then
yeah.
so that
Yeah.
which like you're like, "Oh my god, I didn't even think about that."
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
you want to go into market access?
Okay, so like through a weird coincidence, I got recommended to look into this M biotech program recently,
What?
like literally
When?
yesterday. I was talking to someone and he was like, "Yeah, you should like really look into this program and stuff like that." I was like, "Oh, what?" Yeah.
Wait, dude, that actually kind of makes sense for you because like science and biz like cuz like isn't econ kind of business?
Not like the thing is that like the econ I'm interested in is not business. It's all like for the public sector or like university research type. Like it's more the theoretical stuff, but or it's like dealing with like public policy and stuff. But I don't know, like talking to Kara, it definitely did convince me to like take another look at it.
That's wow. Cuz I was going to make a joke about how we should just like keep doing episodes of this podcast until one of us goes like that's the one. But then I was like, okay, no, we're done. Like if that's what we're doing.
That's it, project's over.
Yeah.
um
Well, high five.
so yeah, it's making me like think about it a little more, especially after Kara's like because I've always kind of assumed that if I go into like the business side of things, I'm just gonna be like kind of sad and doing it for the money. I don't know where I
Oh.
picked up that assumption, but that's just what I thought.
Oh. You're going to be kind of sad.
You know, like but listening to her talk about it like so excited and like interested in her work, like that actually is making me like
Mhm.
maybe I should consider it again. Yeah, speaking of that program though, I think we should do some information about that program.
So the program that Kara was talking about, it's officially called the Master of Biotechnology or MBiotech for short program. And according to the University of Toronto's website, it is an interdisciplinary and course-based professional degree program offered through the Institute for Management and Innovation at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. It says that you need a bachelor's degree in any area of like biochem and basically just like any kind of like, you know, when people generally think sciencey. You need a minimum of a mid B.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
cool.
mid B. That's not bad. That's
Yeah.
like research grad school, right? In the final 2 years of study, and if you are doing your studies outside of Canada, you have to submit your GRE. And yeah, just like the usual stuff and letter of intent, CV.
Yeah. It says it's 6 semesters and you get 8 to 12 months of paid work experience, which I think Kara was talking about a little bit. That's really interesting.
Oh wow, they even have like all the courses listed here. By the way, you're welcome, UTM, for the free advertisement.
um Yeah, okay, so she mentioned this like very just like for like 1 second, but I didn't realize, well, like I just guess I didn't logically process that there's PhDs like employed at pharma companies. So I don't know. I just
Oh,
thought
yeah,
that
of
was
course.
yeah, I just like didn't process it in my brain.
Yeah, I mean, like, definitely, like, the people who, like, coordinate all the hard science research, they definitely have to have,
Yeah.
like, PhDs, I
Maybe
feel.
we should talk to someone like that.
Mm.
Because like someone who like goes, PhD is very much for like academic like work. So it's kind of interesting if you don't go into that.
Oh. Oh, I whoa, wait, no, my brain is breaking.
Your brain is working.
Bro, oh my god, I never thought of it that way. So PhDs are for, like, the academic tract.
Yeah.
Huh. Like, traditionally.
Not even like I think in recent years there's been a lot of emphasis on like transferable skills on like what you can do with a PhD in other places, mostly because there's not enough academic jobs anywhere. Like
Mm,
most most fields are just like really really hard to get like a position in now.
mhm.
Yeah. In the States it's all worse because of like all the adjuncting and stuff like that. Anyway, that's a discussion for another time.
Mhm.
We kind of talked about this a bit already, but just like hearing kind of the impact that Kara feels like she's having in her role and things like that, I feel like that affects me a lot. Like I have a hard time working in roles where I don't think that I'm making a very positive contribution or making a difference somewhere.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's like really interesting to hear her say that and truly.
I think I like go back and forth on that. Like I think when I was in middle school, I was like, like there is no God, like I was not made for any purpose. Like this universe did not need my existence. Yeah, like when I was in middle school, I thought that I didn't need to derive meaning from my work because I think I believed, I mean, like this is when I was 12, but I just like believed that yeah, that like they're like basically like you don't need to like the question like what is the meaning of life? Like I just answer that with like, well, it's like whatever meaning you want to like give it, obviously.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, like I think I go back and forth because sometimes I'm like, yeah, like I want to do something where I feel like it's at the very least not like a negative contribution, like
Mm.
working at like an oil place, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like okay, I have a few things to say about that. One is that like um the your casual remark that like the meaning of life is whatever you want it to be. That is not actually an obvious thing. That's like half of philosophy for centuries.
Yeah, but like listen, that's the only thing that I like came that's like the only mind blown moment I had in middle school that like I kept.
Yeah,
So
I mean, it is.
it's like so natural to me now.
Yeah, it feels like second nature now. But so yeah, what I'm saying that it's not obvious, but it's obvious to us now because we have very similar, belief systems and stuff like that. So, um, yeah. And the other thing I was gonna say is that I think like with any role, there within a certain range, you can kind of see it in like different lights. So like with any job, so I'll give you like kind of four examples. One is like with my well, one is related. So the original time that I thought about this was in some TED talk or something like that. I think it was Adam Grant who was talking about this. Was talking about like how
Why are you so prepared to talk about this?
it's just in my brain. um yeah, so he was basically saying how he was talking to these like call center people in university. So basically their job is to like it's like you just get trained on the job and it's like students just do this for like a quick buck or whatever. And they work in the call centers basically calling alumni and asking for donations for the university and stuff like that.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, you told me about this.
did I? Yeah. So basically he kind of put a spin on it on like he was trying to figure out how to motivate them, and then so he did a study where like half of them basically were told like they meet with a scholarship recipient because all this like donation goes to the to fund scholarships for students. And so they met like this recipient and kind of talked to them and like heard about like the impact that it had on their lives and stuff like that. And then the control like didn't really do anything. And then yeah, apparently this is like this huge like change in how many calls are made and how effective the people who talked to the scholarship recipient were because of like the narrative that they kind of had behind their work now, which it wasn't like I'm just trying to get money or I'm trying to like scam someone out of money. It's more of like, yeah, now I'm trying to help like students who are in need and need that scholarship money.
Like you're saying that like the callers made more calls when
Yeah, more calls brought in way, way, way more money, like from the alumni. Yeah.
the call center people performed better or the
Yeah.
alumni gave more money?
Like the call center people performed better and therefore there was more money.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Uh,
Oh, okay, okay.
yeah. And so I think like it kind of emphasizes the point of like the narrative that you have about your work. So the same thing with like Kara, like we kind of talked briefly about how like the pharma industry is like kind of shady in the States especially. In some
Mhm.
ways, not like, you know, not that much here, but
Mhm.
yeah, so it's like also that narrative, right? Where Kara sees it as very much like, helping people's lives, like drugs that people could not afford otherwise, like are very accessible now. And that's like that is like a big driver of why she does the work, it seems like. Whereas someone else might have like this completely different narrative of like, I'm just working to pay my bills, but this like industry is terrible, blah blah blah, like all this stuff, right?
Mm.
And then this is like, okay, this is a big. I brought this up with you multiple times because I'm so peeved that you make this argument. But your thoughts about tutoring, you're like, oh, I'm just contributing to grade inflation, and like, it's
Oh.
this peeves me a lot because I feel like, first of all, not true based on the definition of grade inflation, but also like, in my family, it's always like, it's like my grandpa and also like a bunch of generations before that were teachers, so they take a lot of pride in teaching. So my grandpa's always like, "Oh yeah, if you're tutoring, like it's like the highest job or whatever. Like it's the most like it's seen as a very good thing." So it's very interesting that there's like completely different narratives about that.
Oh yeah, I don't know, like with the tutoring stuff, it's like okay, because like I think the reason that I am so like I do feel a bit like scummy about it is that like I feel like some of the kids I have tutored, like they don't really need tutoring. Like
Right.
it's just like the parents, they want their kids to be like doing something in the summer, you know, and like especially like a lot of like immigrant parents, they're like, you know, like really like on top of the academics.
Yeah.
Um yeah. And then like cuz I think about like in China how it is that like a lot of the kids do like private tutoring.
Hmm.
And it's almost like if you don't do it then you lose out. Yeah, and I think, like, that's happening, like, especially in high school, like, I think, like, my sister, like, has like, I never had a tutor when I was in high school, but my sister, like, does tutoring. She's like, "Oh, like, everyone in AP does tutoring."
Hmm.
And I think it's, like the reason I feel bad about it is because I feel like it, like, increases the barrier to, like, education because now, like, you have to pay, like, you know.
Yeah, like it just becomes necessary. Yeah.
Yeah, it's more like if you don't do it, then you're, like, what it like, tragedy of the commons kind of thing, so
Yeah.
So, yeah, but then on the other hand, like, I do feel like I actually like with some people I actually help improve their like understanding and I feel like I'm good at explaining things. So,
Yeah.
yeah, mostly feel bad, sometimes feel good.
Yeah, I think that's more like case by case, like the specifics of the tutoring job that you have.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. So wait, so your point is
The point was that it is really a like basically you're saying about like we okay, before this, to backtrack, we were talking about how enjoying your job and like whether you need to have meaning and like have feel like you're doing good work to like
uh-huh.
if I was saying that that's really interesting that she has that because that's something I like feel like I need a lot in any job that I work in. Um and so yeah, I was gonna say that a, like there's kind of a range of like interpretations that you can have about any job. Um so yeah,
Oh, I see, I see.
yeah.
Mm.
So part of it is not just like the job, but also your like charitable feelings towards the job.
Yeah, your attitude towards it, right? And like kind of on a similar level, like I was also thinking, maybe like the story that we're told that you need to like love your job and you need to like follow your passion and like all those things. Like that doesn't need to be the case. Like you can have a job you work for like 35 hours a week and you just like slightly enjoy it. You don't like love it, but you don't like mind it and it's like kind of nice and you're good at it and like you can have other things you get fulfillment from like maybe you have like cool hobbies or like you get to travel because you have like stable income so you know so it doesn't you don't your job doesn't have to be like I don't know.
At least I have so much to say about this topic, but I'm just gonna not because we're not gonna be able to end this segment. Like,
I feel like you're like pulling like a lump of words from your mouth and then just throwing it behind you.
but I think it was interesting that she talked about the people that she worked with being like a huge factor in like how much she enjoys her job and things like that. And I think like that is something that like is kind of under considered. Like that can really make or break your enjoyment in a job. And yeah, I think it's just like not talked about that much or like considered that much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen some like grad school advice where it's like, yeah, like you should kind of talk to the grad students in the lab you're considering and stuff like that,
Yes,
where
yes,
it's
I've
like,
heard that so many times. Yeah, yeah, definitely for grad school like even for thesis I've gotten that.
yeah, the last point's like just trivial, like how she was talking about like you can come into kind of a lot of the work that they do in that company from either like a science or business kind of part background in a lot of areas like marketing and stuff like that. Yeah, it was just kind of like I talked to that person who has like that econ person a while ago, family friend. And she's kind of saying like, yeah, it's kind of the same in econ where it's like more of a it's more of like a set of tools where like you can apply it to vastly different industries. Like some of the people who she worked like she knows like she has a colleague who like worked in one field for so long and then suddenly she was like, oh yeah, health economics is really cool. So then like after 10 years she's just like, okay, I'm going to work in health economics now. But it's like really easy to do because it's more like about the tools than it is necessarily about the industry knowledge. That doesn't apply strictly here, I feel like, but it's still kind of interesting.
This has been episode 1 of So You Got a Life Sci Degree with Kara about market access in the pharmaceutical industry. If you would like to support this podcast, you can visit our Patreon at patreon.com/soyougotalifescidegree or leave us a review on iTunes using the link in the show notes. Music you're listening to is No Regrets from audiohelp.com. Thanks for listening and see you next time.